You're not helpful. You're not helping.
Okay, you're all set, Peter.
Okay. Okay, let's call this meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee, April 8th, 2025 at 10 p.m. to order. Do a roll call to see who's here. Of members, Doug Rose.
Here.
Terry Beller.
Here.
Tim Brain.
Here.
Joanna Roach.
Here.
Matt Fee.
Here.
And staff, Leah Hill.
Here.
And Jeff Carlson.
Here.
Thank you. Okay. I'll read my little ditty here. This meeting is being audio and video recorded. Please be aware that other people may be able to see you, and take care not to share your device's screen. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. Please silence all devices and phones. For items with public comment, after committee members have finished their discussion on an agenda item, the chair will afford members of the public up to 3 minutes to speak. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and any affiliations. To give public comment, you must be recognized by the chair and speak through the chair. There is to be no crosstalk with others in attendance. In the interest of efficient use of our time, please speak through the chair. To be recognized for public comment, use the raised hand feature by clicking on the React tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and then click on the raise hand button. When you've finished your comment, please click the lower hand button. It's important for me to note that CRAC isn't required by law to take public comment. We do so because we need your invaluable input. We view public comment as a privilege, so please remain respectful in your comments and do not disparage other speakers or the members of this committee. Okay. So right now we'll take public comment on anything that is not on the agenda. Are there any public comments? Okay. Hearing none. Approval of the minutes.
There's no minutes, Peter.
Okay. All right. So we will move on to capital appropriations related to coastal resilience with Jeff Carlson, Director of Natural Resources. All you, Jeff.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Wasn't sure how formal you guys wanted this to be, so I didn't really prepare a presentation or anything, but I thought I would just walk through the capital items that the Natural Resources Department are putting forward for approval at annual town meeting in about a month from now. And just kind of walk through and kind of explain what some of those are for, how they're related to coastal resiliency. And then there's a couple projects that are a little bit tangential to coastal resiliency, but I'll just kind of make mention of as well. Obviously, the first project that we put forward is kind of the blanket placeholder for our coastal resiliency planning. This is kind of a continuation of some previous years where the town has put anywhere from $1 million to $1.5 million towards coastal resiliency planning. These monies have historically been used for, project development, some initial phases of project. We've used some of them for grant match components. The Easy Street Barrier used a portion for grant match as well, but it's kind of the general that's used. It's applied for through town admin. We work with town admin for how that works. It doesn't necessarily all have to go to our department, to natural resources. If admin has a coastal resiliency priority that they're operating within, that money can come from there. Or if another department came forward with a coastal resiliency project that was within the coastal resiliency plan, that may qualify for funds from here. I do believe if it was something marginal, we probably would have some sort of internal work group that would at least vet that through, and even ultimately potentially maybe comes to crack for how it would apply for that project and look at that, but that hasn't happened to date. The second project that we have in front of everybody is the kind of continued cost related to the design and outreach for the downtown neighborhood flood barrier. for those who have been following along, we are trying to say this as nicely as I can, Leah. You can correct me if I say this incorrectly. The initial scope of that project was to get to a 30% design of a selected alternative. As we're winding down in that grant process, Coastal Zone Management and some other state agencies have kind of requested some additional outreach and vetting of alternatives. And I think now the goal of that project may not be to complete 30% design, but I think to at least a pathway to give folks the most informed choice to kind of provide their opinion on what they'd like to see there. I think that's kind of a fair description of where we are, Leah. Would you say? You can thumbs up if that's close. But to take that project from 30% design to 100% design based upon the alternatives that we've been reviewing, that number, that $2.4 million is to get through design and permitting of a selected alternative. So that may be a little bit flexible depending upon how those alternatives shake out. I will also say, and maybe this will be a question that comes up later, unfortunately, all of these numbers that are within the warrant have been in for quite some time and vetted through the capital program committee. Obviously, for those who follow the news, there's cost changes that are associated, especially with construction materials that are a little uncertain right now. So while these numbers necessarily aren't subject to immediate change, the costs associated with physical construction projects may be a little bit unpredictable for the foreseeable future. I see Doug has his hand up. I'm happy to take questions as I go too. So
You want to take questions as you move along?
sure.
Okay, go ahead, Doug.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Jeff. Just real quick, the capital funding that we're requesting for the Easy Street project, that would be Nantucket's match of CZM funding and other grants that have allowed for that, or no? I'm seeing a shaking of heads from Leah.
No.
Sorry.
So
Okay.
I guess just in general, when we do some of these projects and these larger projects, grant environment, even prior to, right? So this is just, if I would answer this question the same way 5 years ago as 2 years ago is right now. When we put together budgets for projects and put them forward, we generally assume 100% of the cost to the town. That way the project can still get accomplished. If there's a grant or other opportunity that comes forward to offset that cost to the town, or a potential private partner that comes forward to help with the town, or if the land bank is involved with the project and they wish to give funding, we will for certain offset that cost and are more than happy to do so. But typically we budget for the full project in its entirety. That way, if something happens and that grant goes away, if someone decides ultimately not to provide their contribution, we're not stuck with a project that's underway and is 75% built and we're in a scramble. So understanding that costs change over time, sometimes these numbers aren't right. We have to go back for supplemental appropriations, but we do try our best to budget for the full amount of the project up front and to the town.
Thank you.
No problem. So our next resiliency project, we actually have a lot of resiliency projects, I feel like, this year. We've put forward for the actual physical construction of the Sacajah Pond at Pulpus Road coastal protection option. I say that very cautiously because the construction estimate here is for a bulkhead to protect the road that was fronted by a living shoreline, and then that fronted in pond by a collection of reef balls. I know Leah has explained this project to Crack in detail before, so I won't get into the nitty-gritty of that, but this is the original construction estimate to that. Admittedly, we're having some difficulty with Mass Natural Heritage and some permitting options, so that project may get a little bit of a shift. I think if it ends up shifting the way that it looks like right now, it may actually reduce this project in cost, but is a less desirable option for all of us. But we're trying to work through that with Natural Heritage now. So again, happy to answer questions on that, but I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of permitting if people don't want to hear all the trials and tribulations of dealing with state agencies. But that's for that construction project. That would bring that project to hopefully a conclusion after its unfortunate start in 2018 with the breaching of the roadway and then some additional work that's there. So we're hopeful that that will get to conclusion in the next fiscal year or so, depending on construction. The last real pure coastal resiliency project, and then we have the three kind of tangential ones. We're applying, it's a little bit of a pilot project for us, where we really wanted to look at a town-owned facility and focus on some coastal adaptation options for dealing with stuff in place and kind of moving through that process, both permitting and design-wise. The place that made the most sense to us is down at the hatchery at Brant Point. It obviously is in a very vulnerable situation that's there. When that area was designed and the deck at the back, where there's some significant resources that the hatchery uses, was designed and installed. Obviously, things like sea level rise and coastal resiliency weren't even discussion points when that building was put up and installed in the early 1900s. It could use a little redo and protection. It's taken some damage through the years. It's scheduled for a redo and some redecking as it is. So we thought if we were going to go through that process, let's try it as a pilot for running through some building design criteria to match the coastal resiliency plan and look at some, some design flood elevations for what that would be, get that area set so we can see how that would function, how that would work, try that through permitting and see how that goes. It's also a historic structure, so there's some components to that. It felt like a real good toe in the water for a building adaptation project for the town that was fairly low risk and non-controversial to try to get all that stuff put together. So that $250,000 is for design and permitting just for that back dock area and kind of updating that to be more in tune with coastal flooding, but also for the uses at the hatchery. So it'll be kind of an interesting project to see how that plays out. And then the last three aren't necessarily pure coastal resiliency projects or projects that are solely from the coastal resiliency plan. The first project is $2 million towards the implementation of the sediment transport and dredge plan. I know Vince has talked to you guys a lot about that plan through the years, and I know Leah has mentioned it too. That plan is coming to its publication and its release and moving into some of the permitting phases with state agencies. I think our hopes are to put some funding towards getting the ball rolling for some actual dredging and potential, stockpiling of sediments or even some potential beneficial reuse depending upon what's going on. But I think we wanted to make sure that we had some money set aside for implementation of that plan so it didn't have time to sit on the shelf. I know that's always a concern when we do all these planning efforts, that you finish the plan, you even get permits sometimes, it hits the shelf for a little bit, and then all of a sudden, you go back to it a year later and the momentum for that work is kind of stalled out and done. That's something that we definitely don't want to see with this project. We feel that it's important. There are definitely areas of great need for dredging and wanted to make sure that we could at least kind of get engaged, maybe even leverage some of that money for grants that are available for dredging. Also to, as we're looking to, if we're going to use like the Barnstable County dredge or hire a third-party dredger, to have some funds to go ahead and make sure that if we wanted to put someone under contract for some of that work, we could do so and be able to pay them. I'm told that they all like to get paid for their work, so that's kind of the plan with that. I know it's a little bit in flux for what's going to be the final resting place for some of those sediments or where they're going to be reused, and some of those projects would need permitting as well. Again, the intent isn't to necessarily know that right up front, but it's to have the funds in place so we can, once that plan is complete and the permitting for both the removal and the reuse or removal and storage is set in place, to not have any lag time in there. The last two, one of them is what we call our baseline environmental data program. That's the program that we use to collect all of our kind of upfront data. So we use that for our bay scallop and eelgrass surveys. We do that for our water quality monitoring. We've added in some of our coastal erosion monitoring to that. So it's sometimes equipment cost, sometimes consultant cost. But but it's what we're really trying to use to establish those front end metrics to any project. So if we're going to be doing work, right, and I'll use the dredge plant as an example. If we know what our shellfish populations are and our eelgrass populations are and water quality in and around the areas where we're going to be doing work up front, we can measure our impact and then measure how that environment rebounds. Or if it's enhanced, or if we're seeing negative effects, we can try to figure out what those negative effects were caused by so we can avoid those in the future. So it really gives us our kind of glimpse into the pre, during, and post that we find super important. And most important of all, I think we always want to have a product that we can go back to not only the taxpayer, but the general public to say, we know our project worked and here's the data that proves it. And if you have any questions, we're happy to discuss it, but we at least can all share the same information to know what's going on out in the environment there. So it's important. I think this is the 4th year that one's been in. It's been really an invaluable tool to our department and has been really helpful. And we found it successful in helping to get grants just to have more information available than a lot of other communities do and really have interesting information. I can say just as an aside, without that work for the eelgrass and bay scallops, we would have not seen a bushel limit increase for our fishermen or a season extension for our fishermen this year. So that program has been pretty successful for us. The last one that we have is definitely related to resiliency. But it's, oh, excuse me, there's 2 more. I lied to you. The first one is our kind of climate action plan and sustainability framework, kind of mirroring what the state has put together for a climate action plan and other communities, not only on the Cape, but in the mainland. Really starting to look at some of our other climate impacts, whether they be greenhouse gases or energy consumption or those things, and putting together some at least ideas for Nantucket on how we can, do a better job in lessening our impacts to climate change. I think one of the things that's so important about all of that too is, the state has a plan and the state has standards that are set by that plan. And kind of through the grapevine, we're hearing that the state is going to start requiring communities to either meet those standards or have standards in place of their own. I think our big concern here on Nantucket is we don't have a lot of the same opportunity to reduce our impacts that a lot of other communities have, right? We don't have industry, we don't have, large scale manufacturing or anything like that to work with. We really, for lack of better terms, are fairly rural. So we don't necessarily have the ability to meet those standards. So I think our hopes are to develop something that is really focused on Nantucket and things that we can really affect and work on our own, that the state will find acceptable. And we can work with the state to do our best to help meet their needs, but to also for our own community. So that's coming online. And then the last one, and this one's kind of the hardest one to explain a little bit too. Oh, excuse me, that was the one we did last year. One of the other projects we're working on, just to kind of give an update to everybody, because it's just about to finish up in procurement, is last year's capital project, kind of our last one to implement, is we're working on developing kind of an environmental justice framework. I know that's something that comes forward a lot. We see it in pretty much every grant that we do now, especially through the Commonwealth. Some level of how we're addressing our environmental justice needs. So it's whether it's creating better access or opportunity for disadvantaged folks, whether it's disadvantaged for economics or by language restriction or by just accessibility in spots. But those are projects and principles that we're having to apply to all the rest of these projects. So whether it's the downtown neighborhood flood barrier, there's an environmental justice component that we'll have to deal with for any grants related to the Sacagawea Pond project, but that project is underway and hopefully will be finished up with procurement soon. But that's a last year's capital project that hasn't been activated yet. All the rest of our capital items are well underway. So again, I'm happy to answer any questions. As we get these projects going, I'm happy to come back or send our relevant staff member for any of these to come explain where we are progress-wise.
Thank you, Jeff. Go ahead, Gary.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeff, for giving us that summary. As I listen to you and I think about our mission, I guess the question that comes to my mind is this. We have the coastal resilience plan, and we have prioritized what the needs of Nantucket are with respect to the CRP. And I'm sitting here saying, okay, so Jeff has just went over all of these projects. And my question is, if someone said, when you're looking at the annual town meeting, which happens once a year, the only, in theory, sometimes there's a second meeting, we know, but, and it's the one time you get funding, is there a good relationship between our priorities, which all of which probably need funding of some sort, and the ones that you are telling us that are going into the annual town meeting for approval? Because we only have this one shot a year, in theory, to get the folks in Nantucket to say, yes, we want to provide more funding for these projects. But I'm not sure if we look at all of the things you've talked about and our top 10 priorities, that we might have more than 2 or 3 matches at best. So how do we make sure that our priorities get the funding necessary to keep them moving forward at this once a year annual town meeting, when that's when the funding is? That's my question.
No, that's a really great question. And that's kind of the trick, right? For what we do. So we can ask that at staff level. You know, there's a lot of competing interests for what happens programming wise. And there are other projects that may not be, you know, natural resources projects that are related to coastal resiliency. You know, something that comes to mind would be like, and I'll get the name wrong, so Leah, you can correct me again. Like when the Historic District Commission put together the framework for historic structures relevant to updating in flood zones and restrictions. It's Resilient Nantucket Guidelines for Design. It's the longest name ever. I never remember the exact name, but we take those in, right? And we look at the coastal resiliency plan. And then we also get obviously goals and directives. Sometimes they're related to like the select board strategic plan and their environmental leadership goal, or there are other plans that are in place. You know, they might be the Harbor's Action Plan. There are, you know, goals related to the Water Resources Plan. Excuse me, lots of plans for plans. And we sit down and we also look at what are the priorities from all of these plans. And we'll sit down as a group, right? Usually our kind of resiliency team that sits down will be like Leah, Vince, myself, our Shellfish and Aquatic Resources Manager, Tara Riley. We'll sit down and we kind of evaluate all of these interests and where these plans are in priority and try to address as much as we can, right? And in the order that we can get to them. Some of the big drivers to that are, you know, realistically what's available. Some of it gets driven by, you know, what the grant environment looks like and what's available grant wise. Some of it also is just a component of, you know, staff bandwidth. It's, you know, I can't have Leah assigned to 30 projects at one time. None of them will get done, right? So it's kind of finding that balance to how all of that workflow goes together. Some of it's also looking at projects that overlap with other collaborators, you know, with the land bank, and trying to balance all that out. And then once we do, any project that we have, and I happily shared one of these with everybody, at least in natural resources, we develop what we call a project charter. And that's something where we really look at the project, the details, the opportunities, the risks, what the permitting flow would be for it, what resources are necessary. And we essentially put down all of the pieces of the project that are going to be necessary to be done. That gets done by who would probably be the project lead. So I'll just pick one from this one. We use the Sacagawea Pond Living Shoreline Project. That's a project that Leah manages. Leah would put that together. That gets reviewed internally. And before that gets put forward to any funding, we have our internal process where that gets approved. As part of that process, that charter requires identification of plan goals that are being addressed, which plan it is, which goals they are, whether it's, you know, hazard mitigation plan, coastal resiliency plan, harbors plan. And then in reviewing all of the projects that come in this yearly funding cycle, you know, we try to address which ones provide us the most coverage for the most goals, balancing out what projects have deemed to be of critical need by the select board or, from public input. So it's a bit of a high wire act sometimes, I feel like, to kind of go through and play that out. And, we try to do our best to do that. I feel like, especially with the coastal resiliency plan, I feel like we're almost through the list of tier 1 projects for stuff that needed to be done. I feel like I got that terminology correct. There's like the tier 1, 2, and 3. And looking at those longer ones, the coastal resiliency plan is awesome for the sense that it also sets out a time metric that's a lot longer than some of these other plans, right? The Harbors plan is a 10-year window for everything to take place. The coastal resiliency plan obviously goes out like 40 and 50 years. So that's another factor that we take in is,
Yeah.
When we've already kind of preliminary slated those projects to be, if something can get accelerated because, the climate around it for grants or opportunities changes, or there's overlapping projects, certainly something we take into consideration. But I feel like we spend I don't want to say an inordinate amount of time, but we spend a great deal of time figuring out the priority list and what's going on for us to put something to capital. Sometimes we submit projects to capital that also don't make the list. We had one in this year for some additional work on Sackage Pond. And as it went through capital's rubric, it didn't score high enough. And we ultimately decided that it was probably a project that could be deferred to an additional year. The town has a want to have kind of an idea what they want to put forward capital wise for approval, and obviously staying within those bounds is something that's there too. So this year's a tricky capital year. There's a big gnarly capital project that's involved this year that is going to be an interesting discussion. So some of it's a little bit of balance in that too. So hopefully that wasn't a really long-winded answer to your question, but
Yeah.
hopefully it addressed it at least a little bit.
Peter, can I just add on to that for 1 sec?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. So Gary, that's also why it's so helpful when every year we put together that like top 10 or top 12, whatever it may be, list based on the coastal resilience priorities, because with that list, then that gives it, like, if CRAC endorses that, then that gives the projects a little bit more leverage and shows that these should happen soon. And then Jeff had mentioned the select board strategic plan. One of the goals in that is to create or like insert the coastal resilience plan recommendations into, I think it's a 10-year capital plan. So that's in the process as well.
All right, thank you, Leah. Go ahead, Jen.
Thanks, Pete, and thanks, Jeff, for all this. I just had 2 questions kind of about maybe project updates. So if it's not with you, maybe when we get updates later on some of these projects again. But I was curious about what your heritage holdup is with Sackage Pond and just, what component it's relating to, particularly as that might apply to other coastal resilience projects that are coming up. So that was the first question that I had. Do you want me to do both questions at once, or do you want the first one? Then I'll give you the other one.
Sure, you can do both at once.
Okay. And then the second question I had was, you were talking about putting aside money for actual implementation of the sediment transport dredge plan. And I know and it's just wanting more of an update on that project. I know we saw the sediment transport piece, and I personally had a lot of questions to that. I don't know that we've actually seen a dredge piece to that plan yet. And I know myself as a member of the public and of this committee would definitely want a lot more information before I would say we could go to implementation, a little bit more review of what that dredge plan is. And I know you guys are working on this, I'm just saying it, but a deeper thought to what that actual implementation is and the prioritization of that sediment that's coming out of the harbor, hopefully going to restoration plans that are back in the harbor. I'd just like to see more on what's happening with that particular plan. So those are my 2 questions.
Sure. So I'll take the first one first because it's the shorter answer. So in the project design, we had to do some botanical surveys for that area. It's mapped for some plants. In the project area itself, we found one individual of salt pond grass. And
Okay.
in talking to Natural Heritage, they were very inflexible about what management we may be able to do there, to the thought of actually getting into a conversation that said, well, with this information, I think we may have to consider removing the living shoreline portion of the project because we're not given any options where we could do any impact to that area. And we tried everything from slowly adding, fill or sediment to that area and monitoring. We offered money to do, research on the plant itself. We offered to wait to see what comes up and transplant. We offered to remove the upper 6 inches of soil within the project area and set it aside and put it back on top when we were done. And we weren't met with any options or solutions. We were offered, well, we don't know a lot about the plant, so we don't feel that there's anything that's really appropriate that we can think of right now.
Okay.
I'm happy to go in further detail to say that it may have been the most frustrating discussion I've ever had with Mass Natural Heritage. I think would be a pretty fair assessment. Given what I've done for a long time, I've had a lot of conversations with Mass Natural Heritage, and if that one is a top tier one, I just never like when you're presented a regulator's solution of just no, without options or additional ability to explore, especially for, and I apologize, I don't want to make anyone sound like I'm talking down to them about salt pond grass, a species that not a lot are known about. It's very eruptive. It doesn't come back in the same place every year, if at all. It's very transient. So it's something where it may not ever be back in that same spot within 20 feet of that same spot ever again, even if we did nothing or touched it. So we're at a little bit of a loss for what to do there. And we're trying to figure it out. I mean, even our partner on that project, Mass Audubon, when we explained the situation to them, we're just like, well, what do we even do when no one really had an idea? So Jen, you guys have ideas or have dealt with that specific plant or something before, feel free to throw out a suggestion, but it was not it was a very disheartening discussion, to say the least. So
we haven't dealt with it, but I'll pass it on to our botanist and see if she has any ideas. But I am happy to hear it wasn't the rest of the proposed parts of the project. It's just you happen to have a rare plant that we have to figure out.
Yeah, they had no issues with the reef balls out in the pond. And then they understood the need to protect the road. I mean, I think we felt that the living shoreline was an important piece to soften the impact of some hard infrastructure, and knowing the impacts that are associated with hard infrastructure. Apparently a regulatory agency feels differently. So as to the dredge plan, I think where we are in that process, we did some public information sessions where we took some of that modeling out, and we also, kind of offered up just kind of a free opportunity to comment on where people that use the harbor for boating and for fishing, whether it's, sailboats or power boats or whatever it was, feel that there's a need for dredging in those areas, and kind of evaluated those areas against what we are seeing both bathymetrically and then as sediment transport modeling went. I think some of the obvious higher priority areas were things like the Pulpus Harbor entrance channel was high. There was a lot of concern around that. Easy Street Basin got mentioned a lot, some of the areas in there. I think we were taking that public information, and I think at some point in the near future, we'll probably be back with kind of that next phase full public presentation for what was identified and what, before we go into any sort of permitting or full prioritization, we'll probably be back one at least. Definitely as an update to the select board, definitely as an update to you guys for what's going on, and probably at least one more public session. I think Gary kind of touched on this earlier, and for better or for worse, when we look at implementation dollars, this is money that becomes available to us to potentially use on the 1st of July of this year through June 30th of next year. So if we finish up with this, kind of public vetting of prioritization and get into permitting, if we want to start any of that work realistically within the next 18 months, we have to submit these proposals back in the fall. So, I mean, I submitted my capital proposals and capital budget to the town to start the process in October of 2024. So it's getting out my best crystal ball to kind of guess what's going to happen in that time frame. And also working with, our project teams to say, when is this final result, right? When is this going to be done? That project is supposed to be done by the end of this fiscal year, which is June 30th, to at least get to that phase for, we're going to start permitting and we want to get this out for people to review and to see. And then if we get through permitting, like I said, if we want to start that project in that fiscal year, if we don't have money set aside, we're waiting. And realistically, we wouldn't be able to start any work until July of 2026, which is something that may be a year gap to be done. As far as beneficial reuse goes, I think that's a little bit longer of a path for where that needs to go. There's a lot of interests that are there. I completely agree that sediments that are out of the harbor should probably return to those areas that are in and around the harbor, but in an intelligent way. And I say that for just as an example, right? Like, we've dredged Pulpus Harbor entrance channel a number of times in the last 30 years. And historically speaking, we had been putting that sediment back on the Quays Bassett area and those roadways. And lo and behold, through our sediment modeling, all of that sediment goes right back into the Pulpus Harbor entrance channel, and we did it. We didn't understand the kind of the gyre that's there that comes off Pocomo. I think we have a much better understanding of that now. So those sediments wouldn't make a lot of sense to go back, right in that adjacent area. But there are definitely areas, and I think, working with folks like you guys at NCF or TTOR, if there are needs there for nourishment material on the inner harbor, that those would definitely be areas that are there. I think it's also a matter of, once that priority gets set, we can kind of guesstimate what volumes are going to be available for at least rough guesses. Obviously not all of that material may be suitable for beach nourishment. Some of it may be silty, some of it may have stuff in it that we don't want to put back on the beach. But I think we'll get those volumes a lot closer and then can, work with the other constituents around the harbor to figure out where it's best put. So stay tuned.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Joanna, thanks for waiting.
No problem. That was good. I think that, thank you, Jeff, for giving us the overview. I mean, I have a couple of thoughts about all of this. One of which is that, as you know, because we're going to help talk about it at this meeting, we don't have any long-term financing mechanisms for coastal resiliency projects. Right, the projects that Jeff just discussed, the group should understand that those came through the capital budget process. And so there's no way, I mean, this is kind of a circular conversation that this group has been having for a long time now. There is no mechanism in place for us to save money to do these projects outside of the capital budget. So I think that's important for everybody to understand. And the second thing is that the thing I think that the finance committee's recommended, and I think we've tossed this around a bit, and I know capital committee has discussed this as well, is having there be some sort of consistent application of, at least I'll just call them principles, in terms of resiliency to all projects, right? So meaning that there is some sort of checklist that is developed that, as we are budgeting, the town in general, right? As we are budgeting for anything, that we're making sure that there is some sort of, I'll just call it a lens, resiliency lens, that is being looked at when we are spending large amounts of money. And so I think those are two things that are really important for our committee to advocate for. Right. So, and in whatever way is helpful to Jeff and Leah, right?
Thank you, Joanna. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, Joanna makes a good point. Some of us attended the master plan meeting this past weekend, Friday and Saturday, and coastal resiliency was sort of a priority and it was on the top, but there were a lot of concerns of how we're going to determine which projects, how we're going to allocate it, how we're going to be able to afford this. I think that people need to know, people are into the how are we going to do this phase, rightfully so. And I think, so anyway, I think that's, her comments are right on, and I think we need to, and when we get to board comments, later in the meeting, I'll make a comment about thoughts. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. Any other committee members have comments on Jeff's presentation? Nope. Okay, public comment. Any members of the public have anything to say on this presentation? Anything that they've heard? Okay, hearing none, we'll segue right into a similar conversation. Discussion and suggested edits for financial letter to town administration.
Peter, do you
Leah,
want me to share my screen?
Sure.
Okay. And thank you, Jeff, for coming.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for having me. I'm always happy to come and give updates to folks. Thanks for all the great questions.
Do you want me to scroll through the letter, or how do you want
Yeah,
to
I'm assuming
navigate
everybody
this?
had a chance. I'm assuming everybody had a chance to read it. But you want to scroll through it, that's fine. Okay. Doug, you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, thank you, Peter. And this is I guess, maybe it's certainly, I'll start by saying I think the letter is very well written, Joanna. I totally defer to your knowledge as to how FinCom and Capcom and all the other comms function in order to, secure funding. I think everything you said makes sense on one level. And I guess my only reservation, the thing that's always been sort of in the back of my mind with a lot of these conversations around funding for coastal resilience projects, has more to do with how they are messaged to the voters. So maybe this isn't directly relevant to the letter. It's more a philosophical question, I think, for all of us to consider. And that is, when voters are being asked to support funding for X, Y, and Z, I think the average voter tends to be much more amenable to supporting a project that has a specific scope, specific benefits. And I think they care less about the sort of esoteric idea of coastal resilience. As an example, they want to have a harbor and a steamboat wharf that they can get to, right? So rather than calling something a coastal resilience enhancement project for the harbor, I think it's more understandable and acceptable and of value to voters to say, we're not asking for a fund to support this general idea. We're looking to support a project that has specific benefits. I hope I'm making sense. So I don't want to suggest that your letter is not a good idea. I think it probably is a very good idea. I just think that in general, when we ask for what some people might regard as sort of a slush fund, a place to just put money for future use that has yet to really be articulated, I think it gets people rightfully a little sketchy. And so I don't know if this resonates with other people, but it's been weighing on me that I think there's a limit to people's interest in funding something called coastal resilience. Tell me what I'm getting for the money I'm spending, right? So that was my little soapbox. I'll shut up now.
Okay, before it slips out of my brain, I just wanted to say that when it's appropriate, we need to say specifically what the money is going to go to, because we're asking for that money. We need to pay for this thing. But at the stage in the game we're in now, and what I think Joanna's trying to, you know, achieve for us is that we get this money flowing to us, and get money going into whatever funds that then the town will draw from and put toward the specific projects that Doug's talking about. So we could then say, okay, this money that we got from this funds that we created, these revenue sources, is going to go to this thing. But I think that we have to have this letter, saying that this is what we want to do. I mean, this letter is actually, it's the epitome of what CRAC is doing. We're the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. We are advising town administration and the select board to hopefully put all this in place so more money comes in. And then when that money comes in, then we've got, okay, the slush fund to pull from to go to the specific project. And then we do a presentation on, or a letter of why we need this money for this. So I hear what you're saying, Doug. And maybe Joanna's going to back me up. Go ahead, Joanna.
Well, so stabilization funds in these types of financing mechanisms are not called slush funds. Okay, so that's a poor thing for anyone to call it, because this is money that the town has raised and they're setting aside. So I want to make the analogy of there's two ways to buy a car, right? Like you could save $5,000 a year, and then in so many years you can buy the car, and you might have to finance some of the car, but at least you have the down payment. Or you can go take a loan out and buy the car for $60,000. This allows us, I think, and the voters, right? This is the point that I think Doug was trying to make, to have a savings account that we are applying towards the loan. Because once you get into these high dollar expenditures, right, you're looking at overrides, right? And you're looking at where we come up against Proposition 2.5, right? And so that means that the bulk of our projects will be funded outside of that they'll have to be approved by an override. And this gives us some money that won't, right? This is truly like having a savings bank, a savings account that you would save money towards purchasing something. And for the voters, at least for me, I'm more comfortable saving and applying my savings towards the purchase than I am voting to finance a debt override. How's that?
Sounds good to me. Kind of said what I was saying, but much clearer and much more intelligently. Anybody else have a comment? All right. Okay, go ahead, Gary.
Thanks, Peter. Joanne, I think you wrote a very terrific letter. I like the letter, and I think it's well stated. The only question I have is whether or not we should indicate which of these funding mechanisms we would like them, to proceed with in the order of priority, instead of letting, give them the benefit of our judgment that these are several different funding mechanisms. We think that the first one is the one that would be most readily acceptable by the public, and therefore we recommend that, et cetera, et cetera. So give them a little bit more help in figuring out which one we should proceed with, as opposed to having them say, okay, now we got to go and debate among ourselves which of these different projects is most important to us. Maybe we could give them a little help by saying, and with respect to these recommendations, this would be our priority recommendation to go forward on. That's all. It's a good letter, though. Great.
Thank you, Gary. Anybody else want to make a comment or edits?
Peter, I
Go ahead.
can't
Leah.
find my animated hand, but anyway, I think it's well written. I would suggest at the bottom to explicitly say like what you think the next step should be. So is that meeting with the select board? Is it putting it on their agenda to have a discussion about? Is it to meet with Brian Turbot, the finance director? Like have some sort of action, next action.
Right. Thanks, Leah. Go ahead, Matt.
No, I think Leah just kind of stole my thunder. I was going to say, what is it we want to do? I think the letter's really good. I think a stabilization fund is excellent. I'm not sure that, that the town has so many competing needs. I'm not sure whether the other ones will, how we will fund a yearly fund, but it should be talked about. Maybe that could be done. Maybe the discussion of that could be a work group with the finance department and Joanna and and finance department, Joanna, select board member, coastal resiliency, et cetera. I don't know, like, but we should put something like that in. We'd like to, convene a work group so that to do this within 30 days, within 60 days, something like that. And ideally bring it to town meeting, something, special town meeting in the fall. I would put a little bit of direction on it so that it doesn't just get put down to the bottom of the pile again.
Thanks, Matt. Go ahead, Joanna.
Yeah, I'm basically going to agree. I mean, to Gary's point, my idea around how this would proceed was that Brian would determine, which of these he thought would be appropriate, or have a conversation with a group of us, or come to our meeting. But I do think the fall town meeting's mentioned in the first paragraph, but I think we could easily add to the bottom of this that we'd like to have a meeting with Brian and understand the steps necessary to put this on the warrant in the fall.
Okay, are there more comments? It sounds like to me that we want Joanna to modify her letter and bring it back to the next meeting for a final vote. Is that what it sounds like to you, Joanna, and everybody else?
I can do that. I think we're probably running out of time. I don't know if we could either we could probably just add what we need to add into the letter right now and vote on it, because I don't want to run out of time. Right.
Okay, so then do you have something prepared right now that Leah could put in there that we could say we like it?
Why don't we continue with the meeting? I'll write something. I will email it to Leah. We'll pop it in and we can revisit this a little before noon. How's that?
Okay, cutting it close, my type of girl. Matt, go ahead.
I have to leave, sort of 11:30ish. So,
We'll
but
do it by
my thought was, why don't we, why don't we just say, we want those things added, and we allow
trust
the
you.
chair and, and Joanna and Leah to do it.
Okay.
I'm
I agree.
comfortable with a vote like that.
As am I.
Okay, great.
Do you need a motion?
So moved.
What do you,
Second.
wait, what are you moving, Gary? Make sure you say it.
We're moving that the letter be approved with the suggestions added by Joanna that we have talked about adding to the finality of that letter.
All right, great. You seconded, Doug?
Yes.
Okay, all's in favor? Matt, Doug,
Aye.
Gary,
Aye.
Jen,
Aye.
Tim,
Aye.
Joanna,
Aye.
chair votes aye. Okay, are there any public comments on what we just did? Okay, no public comments. We will move on to presentation.
Peter, just want to thank Joanna for her work on that. Great letter.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel like we made some progress.
Yep.
Presentation on dune stabilization pilot project by Leah Hill, Coastal Resilience Coordinator.
Thanks, Peter. I'm going to share my screen again. Okay, I just want to make sure I did it right. Are you seeing the presentation and not the
Yes.
presenter view? Great. So today I'm going to give an update about the dune stabilization pilot project that NRD and land bank staff and Jen helped install. Let's see, when was that? 2 weeks ago? So the new technology that we were using is called a cliff stabilizer, and these pictures depict what it is. Basically, it's these green, I call them like, they look like honeycombs to me. And they have a stainless steel screw anchor that go through them. And so with an impact drill, you drill the anchor into the coastal bank, and that is where it is. And then what you do is you plant dune grass between, like in these little cubbies, and you don't fill all of the cubbies, you fill about 6 of them. And then when the roots stabilize and start to grow, usually after one growing season, then you take these out. So they are completely temporary. And the company that has developed these is called Coastal Technologies, and they're out of Long Island. We also wanted to use this other technology from Coastal Technologies, but again, due to mass heritage, we weren't able to install these at this point of the project. The idea for these, they're called dune guards, is again, it has a screw anchor and then these little things that come off of it. I can play the video, but you screw them into the beach and it captures the aeolian sediment transport. So that's the sediment that's blowing in the wind, which occurs very often here, especially during the winter. And it captures those and starts to build a dune. So if you can see here, you put it in, sand accretes, and then you can actually unscrew the dune guard and have it continue to grow in elevation. So this dune guard was put in, this is just from the company's, oh darn, it's not letting me play it. Okay, well, I will send you that video at another time. But the video is showing that this dune guard was installed, and within 2 hours, a lot of sand has already accumulated at the bottom of the dune guard, just showing how it works. All right, so we chose 2 areas to do this pilot project. We're calling it a pilot project because the technologies have not been used on Nantucket before. They've been used on Long Island, which has similar geology, but we wanted to try them out here. The first area is in Mattocket, so it's at the very end of Mattocket Road where it turns into Ames Avenue to get onto Smith's Point. It's at the very end here, and we actually have an erosion monitoring station right there that we put in since 2022. This area from the erosion monitoring station has lost about 19 feet of coastal bank. So what kind of sparked this is that the town received many letters from Smiths Point residents that had a large concern about this intersection. And they're worried that if this intersection goes, then that they won't have access to their homes. So this area was chosen, one, for that, to see if we can stabilize that dune there, while we develop some longer term strategies for getting to Smith's Point if for some reason this intersection ends up going. So it's on town property, and as you all know, this area is highly dynamic. So that was one site. And then the next site is Dionis. So again, town property. If you walk down the path at Dionis and you look right, it is right there. It has a large coastal bank. It also has an erosion monitoring station that's been out there since 2022, and that area has lost 5 feet of coastal bank since 2022. So it's experiencing erosion, but obviously not as high as Mattocket. So we wanted to compare the 2 different sites with the dynamic of the ocean there and see, will these work? So at both of the sites, we have 4 treatments. So the top is Mattakit and the bottom is Dionis. So one area is the cliff stabilizers, so those kind of green honeycombs that are planted with dune grass. This area was supposed to be for dune guards. So we're going to try to re-permit those to see if we can use them when it's not bird season. So Mass Heritage was worried that it would negatively impact bird habitat. So we'll see if we can put those in, in the fall, winter, and early spring when the birds aren't here to help build up that dune. And then this area is just the beach grass plantings. And then this area is the control, so there's nothing there. So at each site, we'll be comparing all 4 treatments with each other and then comparing the 2 sites with each other. And each treatment is about 400 square feet, so the total is about 1,600 square feet. So it's not a very large area. The Mattakit installation, that took about 3 hours. And I would say most of the time was planting the grass. The putting in the cliff stabilizers themselves went quite fast. And we, at each of the site, I'll go over this before, but after installation, GSEN from NCF came out and did elevations and also GPSed the corners of each treatment. And then the Dionis installation took a little bit longer because we had less people helping. And this area, yeah, it took about 5 hours, and land bank staff came out and helped do plantings there. So this is just showing, this is looking down from the coastal bank. So these are the cliff stabilizers. This is the grass. We had to change kind of the treatment, what's the word? The treatment air, not change the treatment areas, but just the kind of orientation of them and the sequence of them, because when we went out there to install, it had the bank had changed a bit. And so in the areas where we were going to put the cliff stabilizers, there was actually vegetation that had fallen off the bank. It was kind of slumping down. So we didn't want to, interrupt that at all. So closest to the path is the cliff stabilizers, and then it's the grass, and then the 2 other areas that don't have a treatment. And in between each treatment, there's a 2 feet buffer as well. Okay, so why did we even do this? Like I had mentioned, they're temporary devices that help stabilize the plants and help capture the sediment. I actually went out to Mattakit yesterday, and after a week of them being installed, there has been a ton of sand accretion on top of the cliff stabilizers. So they're actually help capturing the sand. I was blown away by how much sediment has accreted there in just a week. They're again used in Long Island, so similar geology than here and coastal risks. They've never been used on Nantucket before, and they're really easy to install. The data collection that we'll be doing is elevations throughout the project to see if the dune is actually growing in elevation. We'll be taking plant densities and also mortality as well. It was surprisingly easy to permit. It took about a month, and so that just included going to the Conservation Commission and completing a notice of intent. And by doing that, that also gets sent to Natural Heritage for them to comment on and make, conditions for the project. So we had a time, we had to get this done before April 1st because of bird habitat and piping plovers coming. It was relatively cheap. So in total, it costs about $10,000. So we could say 5,000 for each site. And it doesn't need significant maintenance. So we're not, having to nourish sediment there. It's really just using nature to help nature, to help capture that sediment. And if it works, then it could be really easily replicated on private properties. So, homes that are facing erosion, that, they want to do something. So it'll be easily replicated, and all of the data will be shared. I think I might create like a website for the town as well, so that homeowners could go there and find the necessary information to see if that's something that they would want to do on their property. So with that, that is the end. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Go ahead, Tim.
I'm curious, why did they think the cliff stabilizers wouldn't disturb the bird habitat, but the other devices would?
I don't know, Tim. I asked them for more information on how these devices would negatively impact the habitat, and they wouldn't give me an answer. They also made us they initially wanted the cliff stabilizers all on the coastal bank. So in Mattocket, the coastal bank is a bit lower than in Dionis. So I had to do all these calculations to say, like, how many of the cliff stabilizers would actually be on the beach? How much would be on the coastal bank? And for Dionis, we ended up shifting everything onto the coastal bank instead of some on the coastal beach. So I don't know. In our opinion, they actually help create habitat for birds. So I'm not sure.
Okay, thanks.
All right, go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, these are kind. I like these. They're kind of old school. The Cliffside Beach Club puts sand fences every year, gathers a ton of sand, and then spreads it on their beach. And has been, I walk the dogs there regularly, and you can see how much it does every year. This also reminds me of Christmas trees, which I know are not legal anymore. Some states it's legal, but here it isn't. But we used to put Christmas trees on the at-risk parts of the galls, and it built up the galls. It built up the sand area on the way to Great Point. And so this is a, sort of a business way, or a way of doing what has traditionally been done. So I hope it is effective. And I'm not surprised that preliminarily it is.
Thanks, Matt. Gary, go ahead.
Quick question, Leah. These plastic inserts, when the grass grows, are they visible? Can you still see the green plastic, or when the growth occurs, they actually disappear? Because one of my concerns, I don't know if it's a valid concern or not, is that when you remove the plastic, who knows, the erosion will go again and wipe out all of the newly planted plants. So maybe it could be better just to leave them there if they are not visible once the grass grows. What do you think?
So once the grass grows, they would still be visible, but like I had mentioned when I went out to Mattocket yesterday, they're not that visible anymore because there's sediment on top of them. So they are meant to be taken out, and then to have the plants continue to stabilize and capture the sand. So we can't leave them in indefinitely. In our permit, we have to take them out after the roots have held.
I'm wondering, is there any danger of when you pull them out, you pull the grass out with it?
I don't think so, because the grass is pretty thin and the cubbies are larger. So I don't think so. And then you can actually plant woody plants as well, which we chose not to just for this project. If we continue to do it, I'd like to try that as well. But where the cliff stabilizers meet each other, it creates this kind of triangle or like square in the middle, and that's where you would plant those woody species, so that when you do remove the cliff stabilizers, it wouldn't interact with the woody species because those are left empty.
Okay. Matt,
Yeah,
go
I
ahead, Matt.
noticed they go in with a spiral, like they get corkscrewed in. Can you back them out a little bit?
Yes.
Like if they're covered, do you back them out like 6 inches and back them out 6 again? Can-
Yeah, you could definitely do that.
Yeah, so if they are covered, you back them out a little, you can keep backing them out. And all right, then
Yeah.
that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know that they're plastic and people, some people are up in arms about that, but I just want to reiterate that they are temporary. They're not structures, they're temporary. And that because they're plastic, they're reusable. So, you know, we paid for them, we can use them in other areas over and over and over again.
Do you have any other places that you're going to try them?
Not, I don't have anything in mind right now. I want to see, you know, how these go. They've only been in for 2 weeks or so. So I think in the fall, I'll revisit that and see, you know, based on the data, how they were successful and where, and then based on that information, see other areas that they could be implemented at.
So when you're done and you're doing your first assessment, and depending on the success, hopefully it's awesome and very productive, then also include in that report the cost.
Yes.
Because my sense is it's a low cost way of doing it, and this will be something people are going to want to hear about. So I mean,
Yep,
it's not
absolutely.
not going to say the entire shoreline, but wherever. And then also put a link in there for people who want to do it on their own properties, and you know, I guess coastal engineers, and you know, I'm sure they all know about it, but.
Yep.
Okay, are there any other comments? No? All right, thank you very much, Leah. And I just put this on there, the agenda. I'm sorry, public comment. Is there any public comment? Okay, number 8, additional comments related to the Easy Street flood mitigation project. This is just to make sure that we got it all out of ourselves at the last meeting. Does anybody have any more comments on that project? Leah?
Thanks, Peter. I just want to give a little bit of an update. So Jeff gave you a preview, but so the grant is ending this June in a couple months. And feedback that we've gotten from CZM kind of late in the game, but is to revise the scope and have some more information in there to answer questions that, you know, were brought up during the virtual open houses. And so right now we're working on revising the scope so that we have preliminary cost estimates for all 3 of the alternatives. And then particularly for the middle one that we're calling adaptable road raising. So that would be at 6 feet NAVD 88. So, you know, if that was installed hypothetically today, and then in 20 years, you know, we need to go to 8 feet, like what would be that cost difference rather than just going straight to 8 feet today? So that will be included. We're going to update the 3D models or like those kind of realistic pictures so that the private property owners along Easy Street and Broad Street in those areas that would be raised can kind of visualize what their driveway would look like or access to their home. So that will be another one. And then we're also going before a bunch of the regulatory agencies through MIPA to get initial feedback from them on all 3 alternatives. And then with all of that information, we'll give another updated presentation to the select board. So at this point, we're not going to the select board right now to ask, you know, which one they think should go forward with future design. We're going to be getting all of this information, updating the select board, and then at a later time, they'll be voting on which one to move forward with.
All right, great. Thank you for that update, Leah. Are there any comments from the committee? Matt?
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. I'm struggling with this because I think I just part of me I'm struggling. I think the community is going to have a hard time even with with the second one. I also and I'm wondering, should we be drawing the line, further back from there and allowing water in underneath buildings from there to North Water or South Water? Have we thought about it all the way through? Uh, and I know it's late in the process, or not late, but I know that this is what we're doing and this is what we said. But part of me is just and I'm trying to come to grips with it, but I'm sort of struggling for a long term with that as a long-term vision. And I don't have an answer to it. I'm just being honest. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Go ahead, Leah.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, Matt, for your comments on that. When the CRP was developed, the community did not support, I guess abandoning Easy Street and letting the downtown flood. And so that's where the idea or the concept of the downtown neighborhood flood barrier was to protect. So a lot of the areas around the island, it's either like adapt or relocate, but the downtown is protect for now. And then in later time horizons, if and when the regulatory system gets updated, that would give time to be able to adapt. So I see where you're coming, and we do have to draw the line somewhere, and either any of the alternatives, there's, pros and cons for each, and it's going to be a hard decision. But I think the harder thing to face is if we don't do anything, what's going to happen then?
Before I lose it, thank you, Leah. I hear what Matt's saying. But if we go against what people said in the creation of the plan, and let's say we make the line South Water Street and say everybody east of there, sorry, but we're going to raise the road here and concede the rest. I think that puts those buildings, those property owners, those streets, it endangers them. At least if we raise up on Easy Street and create a protection zone inside of that, it gives the building property owners time to come up and make a decision on what they're going to do. And we all want Easy Street. We all need our main artery going to the Steamship Authority. Otherwise, we're coming around or going the Nantucket Beltway to go around and come down off of Cliff Road. Or we're doing the new pier that has been talked about at the Jetties Beach, and we know how some of us feel about that. So I think we need Easy Street. Anyway, did you have more to say, Matt?
Yeah, I did. I'm not suggesting we abandon Easy Street. I'm not suggesting that that we're retreating and they're all disappearing. What I'm saying is there, first off, one thing I'll say is, are we conceding Easy Street to vehicles for the next 50 years? I would argue maybe we shouldn't, because, and are we going to build a bathtub that could, behind it and give people the false impression that that we're going to protect those buildings? If we say, hey, this is going to be a walkway and it's going to be a great public place and you're going to raise your buildings over time, it's going to be like Old North Wharf, like, and the water's going to flow underneath and whatever. And we can build, everyone wants natural solutions. We're doing that. And then the steamship is going to be protected out to the road, out to North Water, out, going out and taking a left. Like, I think what we have to make sure that we have, that our vision isn't constrained by how things are today. And I feel that we have a little bit of that in this. We aren't going forward in Mattocket, even though the Coastal Resiliency Plan said, we're going to build a dune field. We're trying something else in Mattocket because the dune field was $70 million. And who's going to pay for it? And the state wouldn't approve it. Well, so we pivoted, properly. We did the right thing and pivoted there. And I'm just asking, should we be pivoting here? Especially like what I heard in those meetings, where a lot of people were concerned about, a roadway at waist or, or neck height. And so I think that's why I'm wondering, I'm just pushing back a little bit. I'm having a hard time processing it, and I'm having a hard time putting my future vision of Nantucket into that framework that we've provided. Thank you.
Good. Well, it means you're thinking about it more. We need you. And that's KENEAD. Go ahead, Joanna.
Matt's right. I also went to the planning sessions on Friday night and Saturday, and there was a lot of talk about these issues. That being said, I have just a slightly different, I didn't mind what was proposed, and I mean, you know this because I said it last time. I really liked the tallest option because I felt like it would mean that we wouldn't have to do this twice. But I think the piece of what Matt is saying that is valuable feedback for all of us is that while this is one piece of this puzzle, there are other pieces that have to lock in. And I'm not sure that we've done maybe enough of thinking about how that's going to happen or how that's going to play out and getting those stakeholders involved in the conversation. But I don't also know, Leah, to be fair. Like, I don't know. I mean, I know that from where I sit in my job life, right? I'll just talk about the Dreamland for a second. The Dreamland already has water in their basement, right? They're going to have to raise that building. The sooner that they know what's going to happen on Easy Street, the easier it's going to be for them to plan for the future. And so I'm trying to be an advocate for those businesses in that area so that they can get information now and know how to go back to their organizations and their boards and basically look at how to finance a $40 million project on how to raise some of these things. Now, the NHA is in the same boat, right? The candle factory is going to be underwater shortly, right? And so the more we can do to give businesses and homeowners information in that area, the more reasonably we can expect that they're going to participate in the solution. And that I think is really important. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. And before I go to you, Leah, it makes total sense that we have a unified plan for the imperiled section of the downtown waterfront and say, okay, we've decided we're doing these things. Then that gives all those property owners that Joanne is talking about, okay, this is what the town's doing. We're doing this. So that's going to inform what we're going to do. We can plan now. Right now, those businesses are in limbo and they're like, well, should I go up or not? Or am I pulling out? Or am I giving up my first floor and moving up? And I completely agree. So go ahead, Leah.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, so that's one reason why you all had decided that quarterly that the stakeholders within the overall downtown neighborhood flood barrier would come to CRAC and have discussions like this so that everyone's on the same page. Hopefully they're learning information and then they can bring that back to their boards and decide what works best for their property. So there's that. And then I'm not sure if Matt's still here or not, but I wanted to ask him, Matt, I see where you're coming from, but what is your recommendation then for the whole downtown? Because no matter which way you look, pretty much the whole downtown is in a flood zone. And so if we don't, do Easy Street, then what? Like, Washington Street, South Water Street, all of that is in a flood zone. So there's got to be something planned, which there are some recommendations within the coastal resilience plan to implement. So
Well,
that's my
yeah,
question.
I'm not if I can answer that, Peter, I'm
Yeah,
not
sure,
a
Matt.
coastal engineer, but but what I will say, I think it would be easier to be drawing the line at a higher elevation. All of the places you're talking about are going to be flooding from underneath. And so, my sense would be, can we lift those, can we be advising people, at Brant Point and there and through town to lift, get rid of their basements and lift their buildings, above that a certain height, and then build infrastructure at high ground to handle the cars and the heavy stuff, build build walkways and things where water can flow and flow underneath for, for pedestrians and alternative transportation and all the rest, and find a way to, accept more of the water in, so that we, and now, instead of making everything hard, is there an in between? It's easier. The town is a bit hard, is more difficult to talk about. I think Brant Point is a little easier, and if you look back at some of the Resilience Nantucket stuff that was done there, I think that that's a little easier. I could see a boardwalk there that's, wide, like the length of the thing, and people drive down to their houses that have been raised in golf carts, and and there's wetlands all the way up to the base of the cliff. I can see that the long range vision there should be, Dutch polders, and the people with a lot of money who want to raise their houses and stay there should be able to do that, and we should encourage it. But I think so that one is easier for me to understand. We're not going to be able to stop the water there. We're not going to be able to stop the water on Washington Street. We as much as we try, it's going to rise up. So, so instead of doing it the way we're doing it, should we have roads that are able to lift up and have the utilities under them and continue to stay in those areas, but with it, and then draw the line at, 6 or 8, where 6 or 8 feet is, kind of draw our line there. I'm just thinking about it from that perspective. And I'm not a coastal engineer. I don't have the answer, but I'm struggling.
I'm kind of struggling to understand you as well. So am I hearing it correctly? The areas that are lower elevation, to basically abandon those areas and have people figure out how to get to their private properties without the town.
No, that's
Okay.
not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that instead of saying we're going to build, we're going to build we're going to build a concrete road, or we're going to build, we're going to raise a road 8 feet above your house, and we're going to harden that road and raise a road, down Brant Point or out to Matticat. It's going to be 8 feet. And then you figure out how to, and we're going to drive cars still to these areas, and you figure out how to get to, then you raise your house and figure out how to get your car there. I'm saying, well, maybe there's another way to do that. Maybe instead of building, hard armoring roads, maybe we're building, wide boardwalks that can handle people and bicycles and electric golf carts. And if these guys can lift the golf cart up underneath their house, the water can flow underneath, and we have, in the areas that were wetlands originally, return to wetlands, and maybe maybe it ends up being a lot cheaper. So, in the long run, I don't know, but I feel like, and this was in the Envision Nantucket, there was some of those visions that are worth looking at. I think the Yale students did it. There was some stuff like that in there, and I think it's worth, everyone taking another look at it, because that's kind of what's inspiring me. And I think we're a little stuck on, we've got to have to do it the way it's been done. And I'm not saying that we abandon it. I'm saying that we envision it differently. So.
And so, did you want to say more, Leah? Because I wanted to say something to what Matt said. I agree for Brant Point, and I know which presentation at the Macy warehouse, and I saw that, and I believe that would work best on Brant Point. But what I worry about is the main artery into town for all of our traffic going to the Steamship Authority. And I don't know if maybe boardwalks for pedestrians and golf carts and e-bikes and scooters is fine, but then we need the road to carry our trucks and our cars, and and to me it makes sense to raise up for that at least. So maybe there's a hybrid somewhere in there. And Leah, did you have something, or shall I go to Joanna?
No, you can go to Joanna.
Go ahead, Joanna.
Yeah, there were two more things I wanted to say. One of the other things that came up at this planning session that I think is really important for our group to take into account is zoning. And there was a lot of conversation around the zoning that will have to change to accommodate buildings being raised, particularly what is the height of the roof ridge if everybody's raising their their houses by 11 or 12 feet. And right now, we have no provision for that. The HDC's vote is not, the HDC is not taking that into account on future plans for people. And I think we quickly need to move into, and maybe this is something that our group can do, like maybe the next letter we write to the Board of Selectmen is to try to get them, the select board, is to try to get them to take this up quicker. Right, so that people can, we need to be an advocacy group for giving people tools to retreat and address their property concerns as quickly as we can. And zoning is one of the ways we can do that. I think the second thing I wanted to say, and this is also from just my experience, is that the town, I think, has heavily thought that we're going to get grants for a lot of these things. We are not going to get grants for these things. The way that the current environment is, regardless if this shifts in 4 years, it's going to be a long time before we are recovered and these kinds of projects are grant funded. I think that the ones we have in the hopper, we have a good chance of getting, but there is not going to be grant money for these projects. So the sooner we kind of accept that and understand that, both from the town's perspective and from like nonprofit perspectives, right, who also had considered that grant funding could help some of their projects, this is an unlikely funding source. Right, so I worry about Washington Street. I worry about Easy Street. These are the two places where we really need to pay attention. And I think, zoning is a big issue and funding is the second issue. And I think that, I also think, by the way, that Leah, you did a really good job of those three options and presenting those three options because it caused a great conversation to happen, right? And that is how we're going to move this ball down the court, right?
Thank you, Joanna. Go ahead, Doug.
Thanks. I wanted to respond to one comment Joanna made because I entirely agree. It's the whole idea of zoning and land use regulations being out of step with what we know is coming. And so I think that the zoning work group that we will hopefully be initiating this coming month will keep that in mind. I know one of the things I have on my to-do list in those initial conversations is see what we can do to bring the regulations that relate to flood zone regulation into synergy with things like the HDC's height limits, because right now we've heard about it when we had all the chairs from the various commissions come and speak to us that to some degree they're in conflict, right? You got one regulator that puts a maximum on your height, and another regulator is insisting on your floor going up, and you're just left with no living space. So that was a long-winded way of saying I totally agree with your comment, Joanna. I think we need to evolve our zoning very quickly and make sure that all of our regulatory bodies are in concert as opposed to in conflict. What else was I going to say? Shoot, it flew out of my head. I'll come back to it. Thanks.
Peter, can I say something?
Yes, go ahead, Joanna.
I would love it if we could invite someone from the HDC to come to our meeting and involve them in this conversation, because I think that would be a productive way of starting to introduce the idea that we need to work on this and we need to work on this together.
Okay. Tim? Do you remember what you had to say? You have your hand up.
You mean Doug?
Doug.
I'm sorry, Doug. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Just back to that comment from Joanna. I agree. Joanna, we did have, I'm going blank, which representative from the HDC was here on that series of meetings we had where we had,
Yeah,
right, we had the Airport Commission, we had the HDC, we had Concom, we had all these representatives coming
It was
through.
Ray Powell.
Thank you, Ray Pohl. Thank you. And he expressed the same concern that you're now expressing. So I think they are in the loop on that. And I think it's up to us, back to whoever said it, I think it is up to the CRAC to try to knit all these conflicting areas together, because I feel like to some degree we're a bit of a Switzerland in this. And I think that's what the town needs. We need people who can see all the aspects that are at conflict. And oh, by the way, affordable housing is another consideration that is going to become more and more of a concern. Is the more we constrict building regulations and whatnot, are we running counter to the need to create more affordable housing. So, this is going to be a very complex issue. That's why I initially approached the whole idea of this work group as this is not going to be quick. As our representative to this work group, I want you to know we're not going to have solutions in 6 months. This is going to be a long time, and it's going to take a lot of work. So that's it. Thanks.
Yeah, Doug, we're all a bunch of people who have a lot of patience. This is the group that has a lot of patience because we look down the road, way down the road, knowing that we won't be alive probably to see the grand thing happening. But we all care about Nantucket enough that we're sitting here helping those that come after us. So good point. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I need to go after this comment, but I'm following up on what Doug just talked about, and I was going to talk about it if we had gotten to the comment period. I think part of the solution here is the transfer of development rights. I think there's receiving areas at high ground that could be receiving the buildability from these lots. I think it's changing some of the incentives so everyone isn't automatically allowed to get 2 or 3 or 4 dwellings, and they get bonuses if they're building in the right, building with the right designs and the right roads, et cetera. The density looks like the row houses on Orange Street rather than a bunch of things randomly thrown together. I think that the answer is, the downtown build out, which is very dense, from North Liberty Street out to the airport and connecting an urban grid. And I think all of this is connected. I think how do you get affordable housing? How do you incentivize it? How do you allow the people that are leaving to receive some money and take tax benefits and take conservation restrictions? I think there's a big picture that we need to put together. So over time, we're dense at high ground, and we have less ground cover and less ground cover, less hardscaping, et cetera, in all these at-risk areas. And I think that's a bigger vision, but I think that's something worth us spending more time on at some point. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Matt. Leah.
I just want to go off what Matt said. A lot of that is in the strategic retreat and relocation scope, is to look and see, can there be incentives? And if so, what can they be? What are areas that would be, property development and all of that? Like how legally can we do that? So that'll be explored there.
Good. Don't see any more hands. Are there any more comments? I'm glad we got another chance to talk about this without the constraints of the last meeting. Okay, so we only have one member of the public. Anybody and that member of the public, would you like to say anything? Okay. So new business, Committee on Natural Resources, reports, Planning Board, Concom, Harbor and Shellfish Advisory Board, Select Board, Advisory Committee of Non-Voting Taxpayers, and other committee members. Any of us have any reports? Go ahead, Gary.
Just one comment. Leah was nice enough to appear before the Advisory Committee for Non-Voting Taxpayers this Saturday morning. We have our meetings on Saturday mornings, usually once a month or sometimes twice a month. And she made a great presentation. Everyone was very, very interested and very pleased with the presentation. So thank you on behalf of our whole committee, Leah. That was great.
Excellent. Excellent. You have something, Leah?
Thanks, Gary. I was going to give that update too. So glad you got to it first, Gary.
Okay.
A big discussion too at that was how are we going to pay for this and when? So sounds like CRAC is on the right track for trying to figure out the funding mechanisms. And then I just have 2 updates. So the remote meetings has gotten extended for another 2 years. So that's great. And then the Nantucket Islands Coastal Conference is going to be held on June 10th, it's a Tuesday, from 9 to 4:30. It's free. There's free lunch and breakfast and stuff like that. And some of the sessions will be like local planning updates, restoration, and then a lot of coastal resiliency. So I urge all of you to come. Once we have the registration up, I'll send it to you all. And again, that'll be at the Great Harbor Yacht Club.
Okay, cool. So updating, discussion of upcoming meeting dates and topics. Next meeting is April 22nd, 2025, on Zoom. Joanna, do you have something to say?
I do. I just forwarded Leah something, the MMA, we have this really interesting science speaker coming on the 16th that I wanted to invite you all to come to. It's a woman named Anya Freeman. She has a company called Kind Designs out of Miami, and she does 3D printed living seawalls. And it's totally fascinating. I think everyone on this committee will enjoy listening to her. So it's at 7 p.m. on the 16th. I just forwarded it to you, Leah, so that you could forward it to everybody, because I know that's the right way to do it.
Yeah.
So I hope you can all come, because she's like a dynamo, this woman, and this is like some of the future of how this is going to shift and change. Anyway.
Okay, yeah, definitely send it to us, Leah.
And then the second thing is on the 22nd, it's school vacation. So I don't know if any others won't be here, but I won't be here.
Yeah, Peter, I was going to remind you that we were going to talk about canceling that meeting with the committee.
Okay. Well,
Not
let's,
because I don't love you all.
thank God. What I'm thinking is that maybe at our agenda meeting, we'll work up an agenda and then put it out there, and then I don't know.
I'm not going to be here.
You're not going to be here. Okay.
No.
All right. So what's the next meeting after that?
That'll bring us to, let me check my calendar. May 13th.
May 13th. Damn. May 13th, that's a ways off. That's a month from now. All right. We're gonna have a kick-ass meeting then. We're gonna have lots to talk about. It's gonna go right down to the hour. Okay. Well, if there's nothing else, and we're all good with that.
Doug has his hand up.
Okay, go ahead, Doug.
Yeah, one last thing. I just want to let everybody know that we have two tentative dates, right, Leah, for the work group, the first meeting of the work group, which would be either April 14th or 16th, and we're awaiting confirmation on which of those it'll happen. So whenever we meet again as a crack group, we should hopefully have an update for everybody on the nature of the conversation. And I don't know, Leah, if you've already shared this, but I think the really exciting news is Shannon Hulst is able to join us and kind of help chaperone us, I think, through the process, like she's done with other communities on the Cape. So I think that's a huge win for the work group. And thanks to Leah for making that happen. Thanks. That's it.
And Doug, that's the internal work group. And yeah, and you
Correct.
guys have you guys met?
No.
No. So this would be like a first meeting.
Right.
Okay, good. Glad that's getting going.
And Dave Iverson is the representative from zoning. So we'll have Dave, we'll have Megan, Leah, myself. I'm not sure who else. That's it.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay. If there's nothing else, take a motion for adjourn.
So moved.
Joanna
Second.
moved. Joanna moved to adjourn. Doug seconded. All those in favor? Doug,
Aye.
Gary,
Aye.
Jennifer,
Aye.
Tim,
I.
Joanna,
Aye.
chair votes aye. See you in a month. Probably before then, but yeah.